tired of singing a sorry song. Arm in arm at the top of our lungs. That's how a song of joy is sung. In Alberta and in Ferguson, someone lift their head and they make a sound. San Benito and in Beach Flats, there's a holy noise growing from the ground. Gotta stand up, people, people. Passion bring a light where there once was none. Yeah, stand up, people, people. Action lift the night when we rise as one. Action lift the night when we rise as one.
So here we are, and we are at that front edge of some pretty powerful news, some pretty powerful observations, some pretty powerful speculation and ponderings and wonderings about what's happening with the climate on our dear little planet. Well, how will that affect the habitat that we need, the delicate web of life that we need to live these lives? And so Dr. McPherson has been studying this for a very long time. Well, would you tell us a little bit about the early part? Have you got into the conservation biology and did all that studying and then got into climate change? Why don't you tell the crowd?
Sure. I've been studying climate change since I was a graduate student at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas. And if you've never been there, congratulations. You're already better off than I am.
Since what year?
I started my graduate work there in 1982, January, and started studying climate change in 1984. So 32 years, I guess, I've been studying climate change. I was editing a book along with a colleague in 2002. The book came out in 2003. And I realized at that time that we had triggered events that in all likelihood would lead to human extinction as a result of climate change in the relatively near future. And I was devastated, of course, because as with most people, especially Caucasian males living in the global north, I was in a position of tremendous privilege. So I couldn't even imagine that privilege going away, much less all individuals of our species from this planet. But I'm a conservation biologist, so I study speciation and extinction and habitat. And without habitat, I know that we don't persist. We are human animals, and we frequently forget about that animal part. But as with other organisms, we require habitat in order to survive. So 2002 was a difficult year for me, and it was way early to reach this kind of conclusion. It was not supported to a great extent by evidence, so part of this was intuition. And as a scientist, you don't go around saying that you had intuition, especially if you're a male scientist, because then you don't have the advantage of having women's intuition. So I sort of kept a cap on that for a while, but it has become increasingly clear in these last few years, and especially in these last few months, that we have indeed triggered events beyond our control. In fact, the director of the United Nations Environment Program in New York on June 29th, 1989, was quoted as saying, "We have 10 years to fix the climate change problem, or it's going to be out of human hands." Well, that was about 27 years ago. We didn't fix it. It's been out of human hands for 17 years or so, and the clarity grows stronger with every passing day that we have fired the Clathrin gun. Therefore, methane is being released from the Arctic Ocean at an accelerating rate. That we have triggered moistening of the upper troposphere. Either of those two phenomena is capable of causing human extinction in the very near term because of loss of habitat. We are in the midst of the 6th mass extinction on Earth, and to to believe that a very complex species such as ourselves that depend upon so many other species on the planet for our own survival, to believe that we can somehow escape the sixth mass extinction is the very height of hubris.
Yeah. You told me to.
Can you define hubris, please?
Yeah, so that's why I said, easy on the big words, Guy, and he comes out with the big words in the first few minutes. That's short words, but big meaning. And so I failed to mention to start, and before he got too far, I want to say, in general, what we're looking at here is that Guy is going to present his perspective of what's going on for the next 20 minutes or so, and then we're going to open up to lots of discussion and lots of feeling and what this brings up in folks. And that's really the key here. You can go online and see hours and hours and hours of him sharing his science and so many other. And why would you not? It's fascinating, and it's him. But the beauty of what's here right now in the living room is that there's a bunch of us humans that get to look at each other. And there's a bunch of connection that can happen, and feeling that can happen, and feeling that can be shared. Because we're kind of out there on the edge, and especially him. I mean, he's already used the extinction word, I think, 6 times. And that's a big one to swallow. You know, that possibility actually exists in the relatively near term, or even if it stretches out 50 or 100 years, that's pretty near term as well. And so we just want you to know that this is the plan. Talk a bit, and then really dig into feelings. So we're hoping that you will share as much as you can tonight, and we'll give everybody an opportunity to do that. So, how are any people in the room kind of early in your study of climate change? Okay. People who've done just a little bit would say they've done a little bit, but not too much. A couple more. Who says they've done quite a bit of study in climate change, and who thinks that they could be sitting here giving this talk? Lots of study in climate change. A couple or 3 or 4. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, get up here. More chairs. More microphones. Then you'd have to hand it to more people. Never mind.
I'm
Stay in your
still
seats.
waiting for the definition of hubris.
Okay, we'll send it back to him for that. But where were you?
Excessive pride.
Excessive pride, that was good. She's a walking dictionary. Yeah, that's,
Considering.
yeah.
Oh, troposphere, yeah.
Okay, so class rate gun, troposphere, all those big words I use.
Industrial civilization.
Completely
That one I
alternative.
know.
Yeah. So our species, Homo sapiens, has been on the planet for about 200,000 years. Our genus, the genus Homo, has been on the planet for 2.8 million years. 2.8 million years. So our genus has been here for a long time. Something resembling humans has been here for 5.5 or 6 million years. The universe is 13.8 billion years old. 13.8 thousand million. So no matter how you look at us humans, no matter how you define that, we're new. We're new on the planetary, on the stage of the cosmos, and even at the level of the planet, 4.6 billion years. So people tell me all the time we can fix this, and that to imagine human beings going extinct is ridiculous, because clearly we're here for a reason, or the universe wants us to be here. And I think 13.8 billion years of the universe, our species 200,000 years, the universe has been very patient, waiting for us to show up, creating conditions in which we could appear almost as if by magic, and then here we are. So I suspect the whole of the cosmos is not about us, our favorite species. Great quote from writer Farley Mowat, who said, and I'm going to slightly paraphrase here, we believe we're a good species going somewhere important, and at the last minute we'll change course and God will smile on us. It's delusion. And the last minute was quite a while ago. As I indicated, the United Nations official in 1989 concluded that we had 10 years to fix the climate change problem, and we haven't. And in fact, every day it gets worse. Every year we set a new record for carbon emissions into the atmosphere. So perhaps most of you are familiar with 350.org, the nonprofit organization that indicates we must get down to 350 parts per million. Actually, that's the upper limit established by climate scientist James Hansen in 1988. 350 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is the absolute upper limit at which our species will survive. Well, we're at 408, 409 parts per million right now. And the heating associated with today's level of carbon dioxide will persist for at least the next 1,000 years. At least the next 1,000 years. Then that's only carbon dioxide. Subsequently, and relatively recently, we have, and by we I mean the scientific community, has discovered that the clathrate gun has almost certainly been fired. Clathrates are chemical cages surrounding methane molecules, CH4 molecules. Most notably in permafrost and in the relatively shallow Arctic Ocean, but it's been found within the last 5 years or so that they're really all over the globe. There are clathrates holding methane in many places in the shallow oceans of the continental shelves, not to mention the permafrost. And like carbon dioxide, methane has gotten exponential in the atmosphere. Methane, or CH4, breaks out of these chemical cages. The chemical cages break open when the temperature rises ever so slightly. Methane is therefore released into the water column or into the atmosphere. Methane is at least 100 times more powerful a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, molecule for molecule. So it's a big, big deal. The atmospheric rise of methane in the atmosphere by itself is almost certainly sufficient to cause global average temperature to rise 5 to 10 degrees Celsius in a decade or two. This according to climate scientist Paul Beckwith at the University of Ottawa. We've never had humans on the planet at somewhere between 2.2 and 3.2 degrees Celsius above baseline, meaning at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, meaning when the global average temperature was 13.5 degrees Celsius. In general, the planet is characterized by two stable states regarding temperature. Ice age, which sounds like it should be 0 degrees Celsius or freezing, but in fact it's 12 degrees Celsius. There's a bunch of ice, but the global average temperature of the planet is about 12 degrees Celsius. And then there's hothouse Earth, Jurassic Park, and that's about 22 degrees Celsius. So there's not much variation there. 12 degrees, 22 degrees. Our bodies experience that kind of variation in temperature in a single day, sometimes in a single 5-minute period when we walk from outdoors to indoors. So the issue is not even remotely, that we can't adapt. We have this great technology. We have clothes, we have cooling fans, we have showers, we have air conditioners, we have all this stuff that enables us to change the temperature around us and therefore ensure that we don't get so hot that we experience physiological conditions leading to our death, either from being too cold or too hot. That's not the issue. The issue instead is one of habitat. If I were a realtor, I'd say habitat, habitat, habitat.
Yeah.
Because that's the whole story of the human experience. Our species has experienced habitat suitable for our species to persist. At around 12 degrees Celsius, we have survived ice ages, all the way up to somewhere between 16 and 17 degrees Celsius. So about half of the temperature range that the planet has found itself in over the course of the last 2 billion years. In those 2 billion years, there have been a few periods of ice age that don't persist very long, and there have been many periods of hothouse, 22 degrees Celsius, that have persisted for very long periods of time, and almost nothing in between. Just a few periods of stability for a few thousands or tens of thousands of years in between those two stable states of ice age and hothouse. It seems that we're headed to hothouse faster than has ever occurred in not just the history of humans on the planet, but the history of the planet within the last 2 billion years. way, way, way longer than the genus Homo has been here. So if that occurs, and it seems very likely to occur in the not very distant future, then I don't see any way our species will have habitat for us, our favorite species, on the planet. But I could be wrong.
Please.
In fact,
He is wrong. This is all just a joke. You're all okay. Just kidding. April
thank you, you're
Fools.
free to
Yes.
go.
You know, wow, deep stuff. And so many scientists will say, yeah, it looks like it's going bad. Let's get on it, or we don't have much time, or we better start acting. But almost all of them, to a man, woman, person, don't go to where Dr. McPherson has gone because, in part, they don't have the background of conservation biology, the wisdom of what does it take for habitat to break down? What does it take for the web of life to get torn in such a way that we can't grow crops anymore, right, in certain regions, which throws everything off and you can't just go plant them somewhere else, right? How do we adapt? How do we as a species adapt as the weather changes and the habitat changes? And that's really the difference here, and why maybe you haven't heard other scientists talk about extinction of our species is because, A, they don't want to go there because it sounds crazy and nobody wants to hear it. But like what did the guy say, your friend from Australia, the boater, yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, my friend Kevin Hester, Kiwi, lives in New Zealand, was a sailor for a long time, made 16 ocean passages. So, long-time sailor, then injured himself beyond the ability to sail. But he said it's the responsibility of the captain of the ship to tell people when the ship is going down. It's actually malpractice if you don't tell people. So I hear all the time the analogy with the Second Amendment, that I'm crying fire in a theater and that's irresponsible. Well, sure, unless the theater is on fire, then I'd say it's completely responsible.
I think you mean First Amendment.
Whatever. Mine's twice as good as your amendment. Thank you for the correction. Jeez, how embarrassing.
No more microphone for you. That's terrible. You got to know the Constitution.
You know, science, not law.
So that really rang true to me too. It's not fun to talk about this, right? But there's a responsibility for the scout who sees that things are coming to report back. And you don't have to believe this. Please make your own decisions, do your own research, go to the website, go anywhere to look into this more if you're drawn to it. Some people aren't drawn to this and don't want to ever think about it again, and that's okay too. Because there's a big dose of compassion that has to go along with this too. We're a young species. I like to say we have a 2.0 brain and we've signed up for a 4.0 puzzle. Right? We're 6-year-olds and they put a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle in front of us. We just don't seem to have the grasp to say, wait a minute, we can't keep doing this and expect the planet to take care of us. And this is the big difference from his perspective than other scientists, is he has that wisdom to say, what will happen when the temperatures change and how can that affect us in, the best case scenario and the worst case scenario alike. And we'll take questions in just a few more minutes, if you guys hang on. What do you say now?
I'm on 1.0.
Okay, good.
I mean, I know what to say. So it does look really ugly. Usually the pushback I get, the resistance I get, comes from scientists who are engineers or physicists or astronomers, to quote the local newspaper. And I suspect those folks haven't spent a lot of time focusing on biology and ecology. And I studied ecosystem ecology for a long time. My friend Paul Beckwith, who I already mentioned at the University of Ottawa in Canada, projects 5 to 11 degrees Celsius global average temperature rise. That latter number takes us well beyond what Earth has experienced in the last 2 billion years. And he says, and we're going to hit that within the next decade or two and we'll be fine. And then he accuses me of being insane for thinking about human extinction in light of that temperature rise. And so I asked him, what do you do? What's the solution? And he says, we haven't even tried working on this yet, not seriously. So Paul, what do you do? And Paul, first of all, said nuclear submarines. We can live in nuclear submarines. no, seriously, Paul, what about habitat? He says, we'll come up and we'll get food or whatever.
We'll get food.
And then after about a year of me making fun of him for that, he switched to Soylent Green.
Ah, yes.
As long as there are humans, we'll always have something to eat. I'd like to have you over for dinner. And then most recently, he suggested we fire off hydrogen bombs in the desert in his out loud voice.
What?
Yeah,
For what?
just to put particles up into the atmosphere and serve as a global dimming agent. Okay, so we're willing to bomb the planet
In order to save it.
to give ourselves, right, this is bombing the planet to save it. It's a step beyond the Vietnam era expression. And so there's a difference of opinion about, one, what it means to experience a very rapid global average rise in temperature in terms of habitat for ours and other species, and two, what we should do in response. And I have never suggested inaction in response. I think that we ought to be taking action. There's some great work done by Tim Garrett at the University of Utah, atmospheric scientist, at least 3 papers so far dating back to 2009. And what he finds is that only collapse of civilization prevents runaway climate change. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty apparent that we have triggered runaway climate change in the intervening period. But let's assume that we haven't. And that only dismantling civilization prevents runaway climate change. Well, I don't have a problem with that. And people asked me, because they couldn't believe what he meant, they say, you're quoting Tim Garrett, but surely he doesn't mean what you say he means. So I asked him directly in email correspondence, what do you mean? And I left it open-ended. What do you mean, the collapse of civilization? And he said what I thought he meant, which is no fuel at the filling stations, no food at the grocery stores, no water coming out of the municipal taps. Civilization is a heat engine. And as he pointed out, it doesn't really matter whether we power civilization with solar panels and wind turbines and wave power or fossil fuels. It still heats the planet. Because all of those first 3 things, solar panels and wind turbines and wave power, are really derived from fossil fuels. They don't replace fossil fuels, they require an enormous amount of fossil fuels to make them and keep them running and maintaining them and so on. So if only collapse of civilization prevents runaway climate change, then I'm all in favor of dismantling civilization. That doesn't make me very popular with the in-crowd either, by the way. So I mentioned things like this. On Tom Hartman's program, Conversations with Great Minds. I made it onto Tom Hartman's Conversations with Great Minds. Wow. Yeah, that was awesome. And then he changed the name of the show. It was Conversations with Great Minds and Guy McPherson. One episode that slipped under the radar. Whatever. Anyway, so we now know about something called global dimming. In addition to releasing greenhouse gases, which act as a blanket on a hot summer day and hold the heat onto the Earth, not allowing the long-wave radiation to escape the planet, but holding that heat down onto the Earth, we also know that industrial activity produces particulates that serve as something of an umbrella. And especially sulfates associated with low-quality coal and aerosols, those are put up there every day. Every day of industrial activity, those go up into the atmosphere and they serve as an umbrella, so they block incoming sunlight. It gets bounced back out into space. So a couple of days, in the case of 9/11, it was found that 3 days after industrial activity slows or ceases, all of those particulates fall out. So we're truly in a position of being damned if we do and damned if we don't. If we, according to Garrett's work, well supported now, only the collapse of civilization prevents runaway climate change. And we now know, as a result of more recent papers on global dimming, that collapse of civilization causes runaway climate change. So, damned if you do and damned if you don't, let's do. And so for me, this doesn't suggest inaction at all. This suggests that we do things differently than we've been doing so far. Obviously we keep doing the same thing, we're going to end up where the United Nations guy said we were going to end up 27 years ago, which is completely out of our hands and we're screwed. And I suspect we're there already. But what better measure of our character than how we act in the light of no action helping? What better measure of our character than how we treat people and other organisms who can do nothing for us? So I think it's a measure of our character that we act with some measure of urgency and to provide ourselves dignity and self-respect when we know that action doesn't matter. You know, there was a far higher rate of survival amongst Jews who rose up in the Warsaw ghettos than amongst those who did not rise up and resist. And the number was still unbelievably low. Like if there's a 99.9% chance you're going to die, oh wait, there's a 100% chance you're going to die. If there's a 99.9% chance you're going to die tonight, would you go down without a fight? Or would you do something? I think it's a measure of our character that we do something. Do you want this?
Do you want me to not have it? I guess that's a better question.
Thank you, and I know we're, oh, yeah, thank you. This is such an odd paradox. So many of us, I suspect, activists, right? Raise your hand if you consider yourself an activist, right? That you have this passion to try to help things and fix things, make things better for your planet. I mean, that's a very human way of being, and we all have it deep. And to when you dare to look at what could happen with the bad side of this story unfolding, and that perhaps we're already past these points where solar panels aren't going to do it, right? And because and most of the solutions we hear, including who's seen Josh Fox's new movie? You guys saw that? Amazing, really pretty good flick, huh? He really. It's called Letting Go of the World and Loving the Things That Climate Can't Change.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
And he really goes there. He takes it to the point of saying, things are really messed up. I'm overwhelmed, he says, 2 different times. And then he comes on with the rest of it to try to create the space that we're creating here that says, well, who do we become? Who do we become if, in fact, the ship is going down? And we often use the Titanic analogy, right? There you are, cruising around. We're on the cruise ship Earth, and we've got all this privilege and all this great stuff. And then the captain comes on. Excuse me, there's been a small problem. Seems as though I've bumped into an iceberg. Right? Sorry, and dinner will not be served, and all the best to you, all of you. Right? And there you are. Hey, wait a minute. This is my
But
life.
is the lounge still open?
Well, oh, that's right. The lounge is still open. Dinner will not be served, but the lounge is open. Right, so then you imagine yourself in that spot. Who do I become? Am I going to go find my loved ones and cuddle? Am I going to go to the bar? Am I going to go try to find the captain and kill him? Am I going to say, hey, does this couch turn into a lifeboat? What can I do? Right, that every different response comes out of people. And that's where we find ourselves. Humanity has never been here before. We're in a brand new world. And we're daring to ask ourselves, who can we become amidst these changes? And whether you believe it's 2 years from now or 20 years from now or 100 years from now, it's still soon enough to dare to ponder for yourself and for us as a species, who do we become? Individually, who do we become collectively? And that's what we're hoping, after answering a few questions, that we can really dig into the next session of what does it feel like inside of you? What comes out of you? How does humanity show through you in hearing this news and syncing with this news and being with this news?
Interesting. Like you, I'm a scientist. And we all know as scientists that as we try to make progress, we do it with some kind of an organized methodology. If we're experimentalists, we build an apparatus and we can describe it. If we're computational type people, we build computer models that can be documented and so forth. And then we use those to reach the conclusions that we reach. And then after we've reached those conclusions, generally we publish them so that other scientists, either experimentalists or computer simulation people or whatever, can reproduce them. And generally in science, it's somebody else's finding the same conclusions that the original scientists found that tends to establish them as truth. And so as I said, I've just heard about your work recently, but those kinds of questions are going through my mind. Have you reached the conclusions that you've reached based on a computer simulation of these phenomena. That's part kind of question one. And question two is, to what extent have other scientists run the same methodology and reach the same conclusions? That's all.
Yeah, that's a great couple of questions. I'm going to repeat them briefly before I answer, so we have them so that everybody can hear them. Have I reached my conclusions based on computer modeling, and have other scientists reached the same conclusion? A couple of things. I have taken a very comprehensive view of the scientific literature that's available. For example, the International Energy Agency in May of 2014 conducted this large-scale assessment and said business as usual takes us up to 6C above baseline. That would be 19.5 degrees Celsius global average temperature by 2050. And then Paul Beckwith, who I've already mentioned a couple of times, comes up about 6 months later, late November 2014, and says it's going to be that warm, but the International Energy Agency did not take into account any significant feedbacks, self-reinforcing feedback loops. They're looking only at carbon dioxide. So he says, I don't think it's crazy to include one more self-reinforcing feedback loop, methane coming out of the Arctic Ocean, to conclude that that 6C could be reached in a decade or two. What I've done most recently is connect a few of the self-reinforcing feedback loops for which we have estimates of timing. We know that methane has gone exponential in the atmosphere. We know that civilization hovers on the brink because civilization depends upon grains for its survival. All civilizations have depended upon the ability to store food for extended periods of time. And that's what allows us to get through the hard times and therefore go into human population overshoot. So there's an article in Truth Out written by Darja Mail within the last month or so called Agriculture on the Brink. And what he means is civilization on the brink, because the ability to grow grains is in question here. So we don't have to warm very much more before we lose civilization because of global dimming that will produce somewhere between 1 and 3 degrees global average temperature rise. And then we just tack on moistening the upper troposphere or atmospheric rise of methane exponentially. Either one of those, and it takes us, I suspect, beyond the ability of other organisms to keep up that provide food for us, and that also clean the water, and so on. Global average temperature, what is referred to as baseline, or the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, is 13.5 degrees Celsius, or about 56 degrees Fahrenheit. So it seems kind of cool. That's where civilizations arose. It's 56 degrees global average temperature. You know, most of the globe is characterized by water. 3/4 of the planet is ocean, and the ocean is a tremendous battery. It stores heat, which comes out of, as we have observed recently during an El Nino event, and it also stores carbon dioxide. But only for a certain amount of time, and then that carbon dioxide starts getting emitted into the atmosphere. So 22 degrees Celsius global average temperature is only 10 degrees above that 12 degrees of ice age. And what that means is only 18 degrees above ice age in Fahrenheit. So we're talking about a pretty narrow range of temperatures, which makes the whole thing seem so ridiculous, right? If you don't know about habitat, you would think, geez, it's been an 18-degree difference between outside and inside here right now. And I'm doing fine. So the issue really is one of habitat, not temperature per se. And the real brackets to keep in mind are the temperature at which we have survived in the past, which is about half of the 12 to 22 that the Earth has been stuck in the last 2 billion years. So we've been here between 12 and 17 tops. So the lower half of that temperature range. Something I haven't mentioned yet is Arctic ice. Most of you are probably familiar that the ice in the Arctic bounces, when it's white and is abundant, it bounces a lot of incoming sunlight back into space. And as the ice disappears, as it has been doing since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, 1750, and most notably since 1979 when we put a satellite up there and all it does is watch the ice in the Arctic. So there's been a profound acceleration since 1979 of the ice disappearing in the Arctic. Ice is tremendously important, and according to an analysis conducted by the U.S. Naval Postgraduate College several years ago, we could have an ice-free Arctic for the first time in human history, in the history of the genus Homo on the planet. We could have an ice-free Arctic, they said, in 2016, plus or minus 3 years. And the United States Geological Survey, one of the most conservative branches of the government, concluded in a tweet, thereby pushing their conservatism beyond into the realm of the 20-year-old. Said 2 months ago we could in fact have an ice-free Arctic this year, and it looks like we're on track for that. The ice is about 2 weeks ahead of the melt season 2012, when ice in the Arctic reached its lowest level ever. So I want you to think about just a little thought experiment for a minute. We walk around at a party, we start with a glass half full of ice and half full of our favorite beverage. And it's 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit, as long as there's a little bit of ice in there. And it takes an hour or two for that ice to melt. As soon as that last sliver of ice melts, all the energy from the room, all the energy from your hand that is touching that glass is going into heating that water instead of melting the ice. Think about when we lose ice in the Arctic. All that energy that is going into melting ice will then go into heating the ocean. I suspect we ain't seen nothing yet when it comes to methane rise in the atmosphere. In the back. Yes, you.
I blame environmentalists for our environmental problems. It's up to environmentalists to speak honestly about solutions, and in my opinion, very few do.
If you want to blame
You were talking about the recent advent of humanity on the Earth as compared to the age of the Earth itself or the universe. Well, the advent of billions of humans is even far more recent than the duration of humans on the Earth itself. Most environmentalists won't even touch the population problem, and I'll tell you something. You take your carbon footprint. If you don't have kids, you don't have a carbon footprint for the rest of eternity. If you do have kids, every one of your kids, your grandkids, their kids, through all the future time, your entire progeny, every one of their carbon footprints is your carbon footprint if you have kids. Who talks about that? Nobody. Nobody.
I'm certainly not going to disagree with you. I taught at university for more than 20 years, and every class I ever taught, I pointed out that human overpopulation is a driver of essentially every environmental problem and social justice problem.
How much time do we spend talking about that as environmentalists? Virtually none.
And I know one of my students from among thousands who didn't have children.
There you go.
We are driven evolutionarily by something stronger than any message I can transmit.
So we're doomed, as you say.
Even Nietzsche gave up on the concept of the Ubermensch, the Superman, the Overman, late in his life, after spending his entire life pointing out that we can overcome our evolutionary instincts. He said, no, apparently we can't.
You just got done saying fight the good fight, and now you're saying we can't. That's basically what we got going here.
No, I'm not.
There's a subtle nuance that he will share with you now around that, and it's very important. Thank you. And then we'll get
I
you
know I'm a
next.
little hot, but
That's okay.
you invited us to be hot.
Thank you. Continue to be
No
hot.
pun intended.
Please.
I'm suggesting that we know better, that we can we can take right action from a Buddhist perspective and not be attached to the outcome, which is almost certain to be bad. So whether we choose to do that, I don't have any control over you. I barely have any control over myself, and those who study free will, or the lack thereof, from among the neuroscience community would say I don't have any. But they also say that we should act as if we do have free will. So I'm going to continue to act that way. Yes, ma'am.
And we've done major national cases. Iran-Contra, the Karen Silkwood case, we shut down the building of nuclear plants for 30 years. I'm telling you, we have to have a message of hope if we're going to deal with this. And we must never decide that it's hopeless. Never. Because it's not only that in our unity and our brilliance as the human family that we can find solutions, but it's also that we don't work alone. We've got our ancestors and our spiritual communities and everything on the other side helping us right now. And the worst thing we can do is give up. The worst thing we can do is decide there's nothing we can do. Because together, we are way more than the sum of our parts. Way more. And that's why we're still here today.
Thank you.
I'm not suggesting that just because I'm hope-free and incredibly liberated by it, that everybody else become hope-free as well.
Why
You
you
can have all the
go
hope you
around
want.
telling everybody this then? Why don't you
Excuse me?
just pay attention to your own life and not try to get everybody else to share your doom and gloom? I mean, it isn't going to do any good. You don't even have an answer to provide for it other than sitting around becoming a Buddhist. What are you trying to say?
Everyone hears of it.
What are you trying to get people to do or not do? Why are you going around doing this?
As I indicated previously, the captain of the ship has a responsibility to point
You're
out
not the
when
captain of the ship. Who made you the captain of the ship?
Who made you the captain of the
No, I'm not the captain of the ship. I mean, you come here and say we're on a ship and you're the captain.
Can he
and you're just here to share all
respond?
the bad news. You know,
You're not going to let me finish a sentence, are
I'll
you?
let you finish the sentence. Don't tell me you're the captain of our ship.
We're all
You're
in
not.
this together.
How about if I'm a lookout and I see a fire? Am I obligated to tell you there's a fire coming?
He's up with the gross.
Most people are. He said iceberg.
Another question?
Iceberg ahead.
I think I can resolve this. My stepfather, 93, spent his whole life an ecologist for the state of Wisconsin, conserving natural areas, original nature boy. And after I first heard Guy McPherson, I was talking with him, and the doom and gloom, and he made the point that whatever the reality is, we still must do all we can. And that's the message I'm hearing from Guy and from other people here as well, is that whatever we need to face the reality, we also need to commit to do all we can.
As I've said repeatedly, I am not proposing inaction. And I also think that the universe is not all about humans. I'm interested, if we have Chinook salmon tomorrow and next week and next month and next year, then we might have Chinook salmon in 10 years or 20 or 100. But if we don't have Chinook salmon tomorrow, we will never have Chinook salmon again. I don't think there will be a human being on the planet because we will run out of habitat at some point in the not too distant future. I think the only way to prevent runaway climate change, based on extensive referee journal literature, is to terminate civilization.
I want to appreciate both of your passions. There's absolutely no negative energy coming from here about your passion for the planet, about your disagreement with him. This is what we're attempting to access. I'll get you next, sir. Just 32 seconds. That what I have found for myself, and maybe if anybody else feels this way who's followed Guy a little bit, is what this has done to me is fired me up. Maybe he's right and we're doomed. Maybe he's slightly wrong and we have 100 years and we figure it out and we stretch it some further and we have a chance. We don't know for sure. His perspective says one thing. Everybody gets to decide for themselves. But what it's done for me is fired me up to realize that I got to access the emergency gene. I got to figure out who the heck I am right now and be that. As if someone had said, you've got a year to live. Oh yeah, watch me live. Right? That instead of thinking, we've got these next 30 years to figure this out, or I got forever to just, I'm going to be 85 when I go, or whatever. No, it's now. And I think that his message has sparked in me this, it's now. this presence that says we gotta be who we are now. And for some people that's save the whales, and for somebody that's go party. And everything in between.
I don't think we should just lay down and just let this consume ourselves. We're too highly intelligent with it. We can adapt, we can evolve our civilization, not terminate it. And I think that we need people who can take the role on as the leaders in the country and make policy decisions that will disrupt corporate greed that continues this oil, this madness of oil versus soil. It's oil versus soil. We need better agricultural techniques. We need to enhance our soils. We need to be growing urban farms for local consumption. And I just don't see it happening right now, but it's beginning. And we're sitting at the center. You're lucky to be here because really some of the most advanced thinking is happening here in Santa Cruz and in California. The rest of the country is looking at us like, God, these guys have really got their act together. So I'm saying I take a completely different view, and I think that we need to stand together and work together for more proactive, positive solutions. That includes policy changes at the federal level. Thank you.
It's amazing to me how I say one thing repeatedly and everybody out there hears something completely different.
Not everybody.
I have never proposed inaction. I think I've said that 5 or 6 times. And yet that's the second time I've heard that I'm telling people to lay down and die.
No, I heard you say take action.
In addition, I'm relaying the refereed journal literature about the collapse of civilization prevented runaway climate change. It's not something I made up.
We understand your findings, but your solutions...
These are not my findings. These are the findings of other scientists
but
that I'm relaying
you're in that
to you.
community, sir.
I'm actually not in that community.
Okay.
I am a scientist. I no longer write journal articles for the refereed journal literature.
When I was working at JPL NASA 2 years ago, there are planetary scientists that are already starting to look at Mars for other sources of agriculture. I mean, these people are way ahead. They're all PhDs, and they're doing planetary work, atmospheric work, and they have the satellites flying around. They're talking about actually increasing, stopping the desertification of the Sahara with new techniques of bringing water, new soil types. So I take a completely different view.
Yes, I understand that you take a completely different view than what the science tells us.
These
That's
are
perfectly
scientists,
clear.
They're very old.
Terraforming Mars seems like a bad idea given
It is. I
what
think
we've
it's a
done
waste of money. I
with
agree
this
there.
place.
I think we should be concentrating on the planet.
All the way in the back there.
My question is, if the bearing does blow this summer, how you had a position earlier that shocked me a little bit about the 40-year time lag between carbon dioxide and heat. In the localized area where this is going to be going, right near Greenland, what's going to be the temperature impact? We're all looking. It was 50 degrees in Greenland today. I mean, what is the prognosis for the temperature rise over that glacier this fall?
A little bit of background. Natalia Shakova is a field researcher in the Arctic. She and her partner Igor Semeletov have been conducting field research on methane for more than a decade in the Arctic Ocean. In November 2013, coincident with the publication of a journal paper, I think it was in Nature Communications, but I'm not positive about that, she was quoted in an interview as saying that a 50 gigaton burst of methane is, quote, highly possible at any time. A 50 gigaton burst of methane would increase global average temperature of the Earth by 1.3 degrees Celsius. If we have an ice-free Arctic this summer, as predicted by the U.S. Naval Postgraduate College, as suggested by the United States Geological Survey, and if as a result we observe that 50 gigaton burst of methane, then the planet will be it'll be really warm in a very short period of time. Perhaps sufficient to cause our extinction due to habitat loss in as little as a year after that, because it takes about a year for methane to circulate the globe. We haven't experienced an ice-free Arctic, so we don't know if that will occur this summer or next summer or the following summer. The U.S. Naval Postgraduate College predicted it would occur in 2016, plus or minus 3 years. We don't know if that alone will produce a 50 gigaton burst of methane, which Nishikova calls highly possible at any time. We don't know if that will produce that because we've never had an ice-free Arctic. But it certainly would be taking the lid off. It'd be like opening the freezer door. So if those two things happen, if we have an ice-free Arctic this summer, and if as a result we experience a 50 gigaton burst of methane, then we could observe a temperature of Earth beyond that experienced by humans in our entire history as any form of humans in as little as 18 months from now.
I believe that we are powerful, that it is that we're incarnated at this time for an immense purpose, and that what we place our attention and charge with our emotion opens up a portal for that to take form. And it is at this time we hear that there's urgency. There's urgency, but I am not about to resonate with fear, with anxiety, with hopelessness. It is time for us to create the world that we want and to call in our ancestors, our guides, our wisdom in every moment. Because we have the ability here among us with all the people that we know for solutions to come.
Thank you.
And
Don't make me be a bad
I'm going
guy.
to say one other thing.
Please.
And it may not be the solutions that science can figure out. It may come in all kinds of ways.
Okay,
And so
thank you.
I just want to say one last thing. I call it in. I call it in. I ask for all of us to open our hearts and our consciousness to call it in.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
I would like to ironically thank you, Guy, for so clearly demonstrating the limitations of the scientific, logical, positivist worldview. Because it's a worldview that is inevitably bankrupt because it doesn't understand the spiritual dimension of our human family, which Carol has referenced. We have other faculties by means of which we can relate to the kind of fluid and plastic nature of the unity of all reality. And by directing our human intention into this realm, we can actually generate a different reality. I'm aware of the fact that you're not aware of that, and I can feel your pain over that. So I would like to apologize for having been so angry about it, because we have to have the ability to communicate the existence of this good news to the rest of the world, and it all joined together to generate this reality as distinct from the other reality which has been generated by the scientific, logical, positivist, strictly materialist worldview.
Well, I'm extremely optimistic. And the reason for that optimism is that the human species only gets in gear when it is in extremis. And we will be in extremis, and that's going to kick our asses into gear. So that gives me great optimism.
Great. All right. So thank you for that. We're happy to stay more and chat and answer questions. And we did get one key one, I thought, which was about liberation. And where do we go from here? Okay, why in the heck are we doing this? You know, it's a great question. And I get to ask it myself, and we ask it to each other. What are we really doing here? You know, we cart this guy around, and we're using fossil fuels to get in places, to share a message that a lot of times people don't want to hear. And what, right? And so this liberation that we've seen in so many people as we've shared this message, that frees them from something in themselves and causes them to, it feels like there's like a wind in the sail that says, man, I know that something's not right. Things aren't right. Right? We get it. Things aren't right. We need to shift. We need to call ourselves forth, and that's what this message often does for people, is create a gratitude. Okay, finally, I understand what may have been bothering me that I didn't know before. that we're possibly in this really bad position, and fire me up, right? And so this liberation, and I'll let Guy share some more on liberation, then we'll take a couple of questions.
Frequently, especially when I speak to younger people, college age, the response is extreme gratitude. I'm often criticized for delivering this information, for transmitting the scientific information to the general public, because it depresses people. I hear that a lot, and especially young people. But what I see is not what I hear about. What I see instead is 18-year-olds skipping across the presentation hall, feeling liberated by the information I present, feeling that they have been lied to their entire lives, and they are now unshackled from the imperialist message that they've been receiving their entire lives. They know there's something wrong. They can't put their finger on it. They know the system has gone awry, and they are absolutely liberated to live now with the ones they're with. And even if I'm completely wrong, even if I have misinterpreted every statement by every scientist, even if Natalia Shakova is wrong and there's no chance of the methane being emitted from the sea, even if all the scientists are liberal left-wing nutcases who are giving the worst-case scenario, I don't see anything wrong with living in the moment, appreciating each other, treating each other with respect, and passionately pursuing a life of excellence, whatever that means to each of us. And ultimately, that's my message. Do what you love, pursue a life of excellence. Our lives are short. The world's oldest human being turned 117 years old in March of last year, early March. And when asked to give her spin on the first 117 years of her life, she said, and I quote, "It seemed rather short." 117 years, it seemed rather short. And then, just to put a punctuation point on her message and mine, she died a few weeks later. It seemed rather short. I promise that no matter how long each of us lives, it will seem rather short. Let's live with urgency. Let's take what we believe to be right action. Let's be present with the ones we're with. I don't see how we could go wrong with those behaviors, regardless of what the future holds. And thank you all for being here and for sticking it out this long.